Good evening all, welcome to Stark Tales. Tonight, we have some interesting scary stories for you. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It was late October when I found myself driving through a desolate stretch of highway, the kind that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The sun had set, and I was tired. My eyes were heavy, and the thought of sleeping in my car made my skin crawl. That's when I spotted it, a small rundown motel with a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. I parked and walked up to the office, greeted by a musty smell that clung to the air like a thick fog. The clerk, an elderly man with sunken cheeks and a vacant stare, handed me a key without asking for my name. "Room 13, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As I made my way to the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hallway was dimly lit, and the wallpaper was peeling, revealing patches of mold underneath. When I opened the door to room 13, I was hit by an overwhelming sense of dread. The room was sparsely furnished, with a bed that looked like it hadn't been changed in weeks. I tried to shake off the feeling and settled in for the night. As I lay in bed, I heard strange noises, whispers that seemed to echo off the walls. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Get out." Heart racing, I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I pulled at the handle, but it felt as if something was holding it shut from the other side. I turned back to the room and noticed something disturbing. The mirror on the wall reflected not just my terrified face, but also a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder, now sounding like a chorus of desperate voices pleading for help. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, I managed to force the door open and bolted down the hallway, not looking back until I reached the office. The clerk was still there, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "You shouldn't have gone in there," he said flatly. "Room 13 is cursed." Without waiting for an explanation, I fled the motel and drove away as fast as I could. To this day, I wonder what happened in that room, and why the clerk didn't warn me before it. I had been traveling for work and decided to stay at a small motel just outside of town. It was one of those places where the paint was chipped and the neon sign buzzed ominously in the night air. Still, it had decent reviews online, so I figured it would do for one night. After checking in, I tossed my bags onto the bed and settled in with some takeout. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an unknown number calling me. Hesitant but curious, I answered. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was silence on the other end, followed by heavy breathing. Just as I was about to hang up, a voice whispered, "Are you alone?" Chills ran down my spine. I hung up immediately and tried to shake it off as a prank call. But then it rang again. Same number. This time, I let it go to voicemail. The next few minutes were agonizingly quiet until my phone buzzed with another notification, a voicemail from that same number. My heart raced as I listened to it. "Let me in," the voice said softly. "I can see you." I glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were and how isolated I felt. My instinct told me to call the front desk, but something held me back. Instead, I pulled the curtains closed tightly and turned off all the lights. Minutes felt like hours as I lay in bed trying to convince myself it was just a prank. But then came a soft knock on the door. "Hello?" The voice was muffled, but eerily familiar, the same voice from the call. My heart pounded in my chest as I remained frozen under the covers, too scared to move. The knocking continued, more insistent this time. "Let me in, please." I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and quietly slipped out of the room through the back exit. As I hurried to my car, I glanced back at my room's window and froze in horror. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the dim light inside. It was staring right at me. I jumped into my car and sped away from that motel without looking back. To this day, I still wonder who or what was waiting for me that night. It was a chilly evening when I checked into a quaint little motel on my way to visit family for Thanksgiving. The place had an old-world charm, but also an air of neglect. Dust clung to every surface like a shroud. After settling into my room, a small but cozy space, I decided to explore the grounds a bit before dinner. As I wandered around, I noticed several old photographs hanging on the walls of the lobby. They depicted various guests over the years, but one photograph caught my eye. A young woman in a white dress standing at the entrance of the motel. Something about her expression struck me as odd. She looked almost sad, her eyes filled with longing. That night, after an uneventful dinner with family, I returned to my room and prepared for bed. As soon as I turned off the lights, I heard soft sobbing coming from somewhere nearby. It sounded like it was right outside my door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slightly to peer into the dimly lit hallway. No one was there, just silence. Shaking off an uneasy feeling, I closed the door and crawled back into bed. But then, it happened again. This time, louder and more desperate. The sobbing continued throughout the night, growing fainter until it finally stopped around dawn. The next morning at breakfast, I asked the front desk clerk about it casually. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, that must have been Clara. Clara. He explained that Clara had been a guest at the motel decades ago. She had checked in for a wedding but never checked out. Her fiancé had tragically died in an accident before their big day. Since then, guests often reported hearing her weeping at night. I felt a chill run down my spine as I recalled her photograph. The sadness etched on her face now made sense. That night, as I lay in bed again, I whispered softly into the darkness, "Clara, you're not alone anymore." And for once, there was silence. I had just wrapped up a long road trip when fatigue set in hard. The only motel within miles was an old place called The Last Stop. Its neon sign flickered ominously in the darkening sky, as if warning me not to enter. Despite my reservations, I checked in and received my key from a young woman who barely made eye contact with me. She seemed anxious, fidgeting with her hair as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. As soon as I entered my room, I felt an unsettling chill wash over me. The air felt heavy, even breathing seemed laborious. Trying to shake off my unease, I decided to take a shower before bed. While washing up, I heard a faint knock at the bathroom door. "Hello?" My voice trembled slightly as I called out. No response came except for another gentle knock, this time more insistent. "Let me in." Panic surged through me. There was no one else in my room. Wrapping myself in a towel, I opened the door cautiously, only to find nothing but emptiness staring back at me. Confused and frightened, I quickly dressed and decided to head down to reception for answers. When I stepped into the hallway, however, everything felt different. Darker somehow. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously above me as shadows danced along the walls. When I reached the front desk, no one was there. Only an open ledger with names scrawled across its pages, dating back decades. That's when I noticed something chilling. Every single guest who had stayed there had checked out, except for one name. The last guest who had mysteriously vanished without a trace. Suddenly feeling trapped and terrified, I sprinted back to my room only to find that my key no longer worked. It wouldn't turn in the lock no matter how hard I tried. Frantically looking around for another escape route, I noticed something strange. All of my belongings were gone from sight. It felt like time had warped around me. Finally breaking down in despair, I banged on the door, yelling for help until finally, someone opened it, but it wasn't anyone from before. It was that same young woman from earlier, but now she looked different, hollow-eyed and pale. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered before disappearing into thin air. I bolted down the stairs and out of that cursed motel without looking back once more, and never spoke of what happened that night again. It was late one night when I decided to stop at a roadside motel after hours of driving through winding country roads. The place looked abandoned at first glance. Dim lights flickered erratically above empty parking spots. But desperation pushed me forward. As soon as I walked inside to check in, an unsettling sensation washed over me. Everything felt eerily quiet, except for distant echoes of laughter coming from somewhere deep within its halls. The clerk handed me a key without even looking up from his newspaper. A disheveled man who seemed lost in another world entirely, and pointed toward room 7 at the end of a long corridor lined with faded wallpaper, peeling away like memories forgotten. After settling into my room, the musty odor lingering heavily, I decided to step outside for some fresh air before bed when suddenly headlights illuminated my path ahead. A car approaching fast. As it slowed down beside me, a young woman leaned out from behind its window, asking if she could hitch a ride further down south, where she claimed she needed help getting home after running away from something terrible. Against my better judgment, and feeling sorry for her plight, I agreed without hesitation despite warnings flashing through my mind about picking up strangers late at night. She climbed into my passenger seat gratefully, thanking me profusely while sharing bits of her story along our drive together until we reached another small town nearby where she insisted we stop for food before continuing our journey together. But just as we pulled into a diner parking lot, she suddenly vanished without warning. 1 minute she was sitting next to me laughing brightly. Next thing, I'm staring at an empty seat. Panicking now, I rushed inside, searching frantically, only to find nobody matching her description anywhere. No trace left behind except for whispers echoing through every corner, reminding me of what had just happened. Feeling unnerved, I hurried back out towards my car, ready to leave this bizarre encounter behind when suddenly I spotted her again, standing by my vehicle, staring blankly ahead. "What are you doing?" My voice quivered slightly as fear gripped tight around my chest. But all she did was smile sadly before whispering softly, "You shouldn't have picked me up." And then she disappeared into thin air once more, leaving nothing but silence hanging heavily around me. I drove away from that motel faster than I'd ever driven before, never looking back again. Thank you for joining us for today's spine-chilling episode. We hope you enjoyed these haunting tales and found them as captivating as we did. If you liked what you saw, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more eerie stories. Stay tuned for our next adventure.